Water does not care how much you paid for your house. It does not care if your grass came in by the truckload, or if your wife picked the stone for the patio from some designer catalogue in Saint-Stane. Louis. Water only remembers one thing, where it is supposed to go, and my new neighbor, Caleb Voss, learned that lesson in a way I would not wish on a man, not even one who had spent 2 months treating me like I was the village idiot. My name is Hank Whitmore, and I have lived outside a little town called Millstone, Missouri, for most of my life, on a stretch of bottomland my grandfather bought after the war, 43 acres of black dirt, soybean rows, old fence posts, and the kind of flat open sky that makes storms look like they are walking straight toward you. I used to love that land in a simple way, the way a man loves a place before he understands how much of his life it is going to take from him. Because farming teaches you pretty quick that land is not something you own as much as something you negotiate with. Every season, every rain, every dry spell, every morning when you look out and try to guess what the weather is thinking, the south end of my place had always been the touchiest part. Beautiful soil, rich as chocolate cake, but low. And when we got those hard spring rains, the water had to move or it would sit there and rot the seed right in the ground. That was why my grandfather and 2 other farmers worked with the county back in the late 60s to cut a narrow drainage swale along the property line. Nothing fancy. Just a shallow grass channel that curved behind the neighboring parcel and carried runoff into a public ditch near County Road 9. It was ugly, I guess. If you were the kind of person who thought land was supposed to look like a golf course, but out where I live, ugly things usually have a job. That swale had been on county maps longer than I had been married. It had survey pins, maintenance records, an easement filed at the courthouse, and about 50 years of local common sense racked around it. Everybody knew you did not fill it, plant trees in it, build a shed over it, or pretend it was just some random dip in the yard. Everybody, apparently, except Caleb Voss. Caleb bought the 10-acre parcel east of mine in early March, and from the first week, you could tell he had not come out there to become part of Millstone. He had come out there to improve it. He was not a bad-looking man, maybe mid-40s, tall, gym shoulders, clean beard, always dressed like a contractor had invited him to a photo shoot instead of a worksite. He drove a black Denali so shiny you could see your own disappointment in the door panel, and he had this way of shaking your hand like he was checking whether you were worth his time. I walked over the day he had a builder and 2 landscapers standing behind the old fence line, all 3 of them pointing at the ground like they had discovered something offensive. I said, "Morning, you must be Caleb. I am Hank from next door." He smiled big, real white teeth, real practiced, and said, "Hank, good to meet you. We're just trying to figure out how to clean up this back side, make it usable." I looked where he was pointing and felt that little pinch behind my ribs that comes before trouble. He meant the swale. I told him, "You will want to leave that channel open. It is county drainage. Water from my south field runs through there when it rains hard." Caleb glanced down at it, then back at me, like I had just told him an old superstition. "That little ditch," he said. "It cuts right through the view." I nodded and said, "It cuts through the water, too, which is the part that matters." One of the landscapers coughed into his fist, trying not to smile. Caleb did not smile. He pushed his sunglasses up on his head and said, "Well, nobody mentioned that at closing." I said, "County easements do not always show up where city folks expect them to, but they are still real. You might call the drainage office before you do anything." He gave me that polite little businessman nod, the kind that means this conversation is over, not because he agrees, but because he has decided you are finished talking. I went home feeling foolish for caring so much, then mad at myself for feeling foolish, because there is nothing foolish about knowing how water moves. For a few weeks, Caleb stayed busy building his dream place. The old ranch house came down, and in its place rose a tall white farmhouse with black windows, a metal roof, wide porches, and outdoor lights that made the place glow at night like a wedding venue. My wife, Lorna, would stand at the kitchen sink and watch the trucks roll in. Sod, stone, lumber, tile, more sod, and she would say, "That man is spending money like it expires." I would tell her, "Long as he leaves the drainage alone, he can put a fountain shaped like Elvis out there for all I care." But I knew he would not leave it alone. I could feel it in the way he looked at that swale, like it was an insult someone had carved into his property. Late April brought the kind of storm that separates decoration from infrastructure. The sky went greenish around supper. and by midnight the rain was hitting our window so hard it sounded like somebody throwing pea gravel. I woke up twice and listened to it pour, then lay there doing farmer math in the dark. 2 inches, maybe 3, maybe more if that cell stalled over us. At first light, I pulled on my boots and stepped onto the back porch. My stomach dropped before I even had both feet outside. The south field was shining like a pond, not wet, not muddy, but covered. Rows of new planted beans sitting under brown water all the way to the fence line. I got on the four-wheeler and drove down there, tires cutting through mud, heart thumping harder with every yard, and when I reached the boundary, I just stopped. The swale was gone, not clogged, not narrowed, gone, filled flat with fresh clay, rolled smooth, covered with bright new sod so green it looked fake against the storm-dark field. Caleb had erased 50 years of drainage because he did not like the view. For a second, I just stared at it, rain dripping from the brim of my cab, my boots sinking, my beans drowning behind me, and then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes anger hits a place in your brain that has no proper language. I called him right there. He answered cheerful, like a man enjoying coffee in a house that had not yet disappointed him. "Caleb," I said, "you filled the drainage swale." There was a pause. Then he said, "We cleaned up the grading." "Yeah." I said, "My field is underwater." He sighed, and I could picture him looking out some giant window at his perfect lawn. "Hank, we had a major storm. Everybody has water." I said, "Not everybody blocked a legal drainage easement." His voice cooled. I improved my own property. I said, "You backed water onto mine." He gave a little laugh then, soft and sharp, and said, "You country guys act like every mud rut is sacred." I remember that line better than I remember what I had for breakfast that morning. You country guys. Like my grandfather, my father, me, and every other man who had kept that land alive were all just sentimental fools worshipping a ditch. I said, "Caleb, call the county before this gets worse." He said, "I have a meeting, Hank," and hung up. By noon, I had called the county myself. They sent out Doris Bell, a drainage inspector who'd been doing that job long enough to scare men twice her size without raising her voice. She climbed out of a county pickup in a yellow raincoat, looked at the flooded rows, looked at Caleb's new sod, and said, "Well, that is one expensive mistake." Caleb came walking over from his patio with his hands in his jacket pockets, face tight, already annoyed that official people were standing near his lawn. Doris unfolded the map on the hood of her truck and showed him the easement. Caleb said his title company had not disclosed it. Doris looked at him over her reading glasses and said, Mr. Ropert, Voss, gravity was disclosed the day you were born." Caleb did not like that. I liked it more than I should have. She gave him 10 calendar days to reopen the swale, restore grade, and stop obstructing county drainage. Otherwise, the county could do it and bill him. Caleb stood there in the drizzle, jaw working, eyes moving from Doris to me, like this was no longer about water, like I had embarrassed him in front of the help. He said, "I will have my attorney look at it." Doris folded the map and said, "You do that." But rain does not wait on attorneys. That evening, another bank of clouds rolled over Millstone, darker than the first, low and mean, and I stood on my porch watching the wind press my wet fields flat, while Caleb's new house glowed across the line, perfect, proud, and sitting right in the path of a lesson he still thought he could add smart. That second storm did not come in polite. It came in like it had been waiting for Caleb to make up his mind, and the minute he chose pride over common sense, the sky opened up and proved it had been listening. Around 9 that night, the wind started knocking at the house, not tapping, knocking, hard enough that Lorna came out of the bedroom in her robe and stood beside my chair without saying anything. Married people get like that after enough years. You do not always need words. She could look at my face and know I was already calculating how many acres I might lose. The rain hit 10 minutes later, a heavy sideways rain that blurred the barn lights and turned the yard into silver streaks. I sat there in the dark with one hand around a mug of coffee gone cold, watching the field disappear one flash of lightning at a time, and all I could think was, he has 10 days on paper, but that water is not giving him 10 hours. By morning, the south field looked worse than I had feared. The water had spread past the low rows and pushed into ground that almost never held standing water. Bean seed does not forgive that kind of thing. It sits under there, softens, swells, and dies quiet, and there is no dramatic music when it happens. Just a farmer standing ankle-deep in mud, knowing a whole section of income is vanishing before breakfast. I drove the fence line again and saw something I had not noticed the day before. Caleb's yard. That perfect sloping yard he had paid some company to sculpt, drained backward toward his walkout basement. The old swale used to catch the runoff before it reached the house and carry it east, but now the water was stacking up against his new retaining wall, spreading across the patio, pressing into the mulch beds around the foundation. I stood there for a minute, looking at his house, and I had one of those ugly human thoughts you are not proud of later. I thought, maybe now he will understand. Then I pushed it away because understanding is one thing, destruction is another, and I did not really want the man's home ruined. I wanted my drainage back. I wanted my field back. I wanted him to stop acting like physics was a local opinion. Around noon, my lawyer called. His name was Owen Carver, old friend of my brother's. Agricultural law, property disputes, the kind of man who could read a county record and smell nonsense before the second page. He said Doris had sent him the easement file, the survey overlays, and the maintenance notes. Then he let out a little whistle and said, "Hank, this is not a grey area. This is black ink on white paper." I said, "Is that lawyer talk, for he's in trouble?" Owen said, "That is lawyer talk, for his lawyer is going to charge him a lot of money to discover water runs downhill." We filed the notice that afternoon. Crop damage, obstruction of drainage, violation of easement, restoration costs, and a request for attorney fees if he kept forcing the issue. I did not enjoy doing it. People think lawsuits are exciting because television taught them that, but in real life, it is mostly folders, invoices, phone calls, and a sour feeling in your stomach because now a neighbor problem has become a public fight. Caleb answered through a lawyer from Kansas City named Martin Vale, a man whose email signature was longer than most church bulletins. Martin's letter said Caleb had acted in good faith, that the drainage feature appeared abandoned, that any flooding was the result of extraordinary rainfall, and that my damages were speculative. Owen read it to me over the phone in the flattest voice imaginable, then said, "Well," he used all the fancy words except "please ignore the map." I laughed because I needed to, but I was not feeling funny. 3 days later, I saw Caleb outside with another crew, still working, still spreading river rock around the patio like decoration could hold back a watershed. That was the moment I decided to try one more time. Not through Doris, not through Owen, just man to man. I drove over in the old Ford, parked by the fence, and Caleb met me halfway across his lawn. He had mud on the edge of his boots for the first time since he moved in, and he looked offended by it. I said, "Caleb, open the swale." He smiled like a man being patient with a child. "Hank, my attorney told me not to discuss this with you." I said, "Then just listen. Water is sitting against your foundation." He looked back at the house, then shrugged too fast. "We have sump pumps." I said, "Sump pumps are not magic." He said, "The builder knows what he is doing." I said, "Your builder did not design the county drainage basin." That got under his skin. He turned toward me, and for the first time the polished mask slipped. "You know what this is really about?" he said. "People around here do not like outsiders. You all smile at church and wave from trucks, but the second someone new does something different, you start guarding every ditch and fence post like it is holy ground." I stared at him, because there was enough truth in the first half to make the lie in the second half even more dangerous. Small towns can be cold to newcomers, sure, and maybe some folks did resent the money, the lights, the big house, the way Caleb seemed to arrive already disappointed in us. But water does not care whether you are local. I said, "This is not about you being new. This is about you blocking the only path that field has had since Johnson was president." He laughed, bitter this time. "There it is. Always the old way." I said, "Old does not mean wrong." He stepped closer and said, "I bought this land. I paid for it. I should not need permission from every farmer within 10 miles to make my backyard look decent." I said, "You bought land with obligations attached. That is how land works." He pointed toward my flooded rows and said, "Maybe your field is the problem, Hank. Maybe it has always been too wet and everybody just dumped the issue onto this property for decades." I felt heat climb up my neck then, because it was one thing to make a mistake and another to insult 3 generations of people who had maintained the very system keeping both our properties usable. I said, "Caleb, You can tell yourself whatever story helps you sleep, but the water is not reading your version. He told me to leave. So I did. Lorna was in the kitchen when I got home, making chicken soup, because that is what she does when the world is going sideways. She feeds somebody. She asked how it went. I said, like teaching algebra to a bull. She shook her head and said, then let the rain tutor him. I looked at her and almost smiled, but there was something sad in it too, because she was not being cruel, just tired. Tired of watching me worry. Tired of watching a man with more money than manners gamble with our crop. Tired of politeness being mistaken for weakness. That night, the third storm arrived. Not the longest, not even the loudest, but the ground was already saturated, and that made all the difference. Rain fell for hours into land that had no room left to drink. Around 5:30 in the morning, my phone rang on the nightstand. Unknown number. I knew before I answered. I said, Caleb? His voice came through thin and cracked. Hank, I need help. I sat up. What happened? There is water in the basement. How much? I do not know. A lot. It is coming in through the back wall. The pumps cannot keep up, and the power flickered twice. I closed my eyes for half a second. Lorna was already awake beside me, watching my face. I said, I will be there in 5 minutes. By the time I pulled into his driveway, daylight was just starting to show behind the rain, grey and ugly. And Caleb was standing near the garage in soaked jeans and bare feet, holding a flashlight like it was the only thing keeping him together. No sunglasses, no country club smile, no lecture about property rights, just panic. He led me inside, and the first thing I heard was water, not dripping, not leaking, rushing. The basement stairs had turned into a brown waterfall. Every few seconds something bumped against the wall below. Heavy and hollow, Caleb's wife, Marissa, was crying near the laundry room, trying to lift cardboard boxes onto a counter while water licked around her ankles. I had only met her once, a quiet woman with tired eyes and a careful smile, and seeing her down there in that mess took the anger right out of me for a moment. This was not a debate anymore. This was a homecoming apart. We went halfway down the stairs, and I saw the big finished basement Caleb had bragged about through his builder. The wet bar, the leather sectional, the theater wall, the kids' playroom, all of it sitting in muddy water that was rising by the minute. A toy fire truck floated past the bottom step and bumped softly against a cabinet. I remember that more than the couch, more than the expensive flooring. That little red truck turning in the dirty water like it was looking for shore. Caleb grabbed the railing and said, "Tell me what to do." There was no pride left in his voice. I looked through the back windows, where water was pressed against the glass wells and foundation, trapped exactly where the swale used to relieve it. I said, "You know what I am going to say." He swallowed hard. "The ditch." I said, "The swale." "Open it now." He nodded so fast it was almost a bow. Okay, I will do it." I called Doris. Caleb called his contractor. Doris must have been sleeping in her boots because she was there in 20 minutes. Raincoat on, clipboard wrapped in a plastic bag, looking at Caleb's backyard like a doctor arriving too late to stop the bleeding but not too late to save the patient. She did not gloat. I respected her for that. She just said, "We need equipment, and we need it now." By 10 o'clock, an excavator was crawling across Caleb's perfect lawn, its tracks chewing through sod that had probably cost more than my first pickup. River rock scraped into piles. Young ornamental trees leaned sideways, mulch washed into the patio drain, and Caleb stood under the porch roof watching every expensive choice get peeled back so the old channel could breathe again. The operator cut into the filled grade, bucket after bucket of packed clay, and for a while nothing happened except rain and engine noise, and the bucket punched through the old line. I heard it before I saw it, a deep sucking rush, like the ground itself had taken a breath. Muddy water broke loose and surged into the cut, fast and furious, carrying leaves, grass, silt, and all of Caleb's certainty with it. It ran east, exactly where it had always run, exactly where my grandfather's generation had taught it to go. Caleb stepped down from the porch into the rain and came to stand beside me at the fence. Neither of us spoke for a while. We watched thousands of gallons move past us, ugly, brown, beautiful water finally going home. Then he said, barely loud enough to hear over the rain, "I thought you were exaggerating." I said, "Most expensive sentence in Missouri." He gave one short laugh, but it broke in the middle. I should have listened. I kept my eyes on the water. Yeah, I said, you should have. For 2 days after that, the land drained like a man finally getting air back in his lungs. It was not instant, and it was not pretty, because nothing about floodwater leaving a field is pretty. It pulls trash, silt, grass clippings, mulch, and every bad decision downhill with it. But by the second morning I could see rows again, dark lines breaking through the water, bent and bruised but visible. I lost more than I wanted to admit at first. Some sections would have to be replanted, some would never come right, and every time I stood there looking at those drowned beings, I felt that quiet anger come back, the kind that does not make you yell. It just settles behind your eyes and stays there. Caleb had his own mess, and I mean a real one. Restoration crews came in with big fans, hoses, moisture meters, masks, dumpsters, the whole disaster parade. They dragged out carpet in long, wet rolls, carried ruined furniture through the garage, stacked warped cabinets by the driveway, and every time the wind shifted, you could smell that basement from the road, wet drywall, mud, mildew, and money turning sour. The worst part was watching Marissa haul out little things, kids' books, framed pictures, Christmas bins, stuff that did not care who had been right or wrong. That softened me more than I expected. I still blamed Caleb. Absolutely I did. But blame gets complicated when you see innocent people paying rent on someone else's pride. Around town, of course, people talked. Millston is small enough that a man can sneeze at the feed store, and by supper somebody at church is praying for his allergies. By Friday, half the county knew Caleb's basement had flooded because he buried the swale. Eddie Nolan at the diner asked me if Caleb was planning to stock it with catfish. Somebody else said he had built the first indoor duck pond in Miller County. I tried not to laugh. I really did. But Lorna caught me smiling into my coffee one morning and said, "Quitmore, do not pretend you are above enjoying poetic justice." I said, "I am a mature man." She said, "You're a farmer with a front row seat." She was not wrong. But the legal side did not disappear just because the water found its way out. Owen kept collecting records. My crop loss estimate, Doris's inspection notes, county drainage maps, photographs from before and after excavation, even old maintenance logs showing the swale had been cleaned and graded over the years. Then Doris found the kind of evidence lawyers dream about, aerial survey photos from a county review 8 years earlier, clear as daylight, showing the swale open, maintained, and running exactly across Caleb's parcel. Owen called me and said, "I may send Doris flowers." I said, "Owen, do not flirt with county employees during active litigation." He said, "It is not flirting if the exhibit is that beautiful." Caleb's insurance company, meanwhile, denied most of his basement claim. They said the damage was tied to an improper drainage modification made by the owner. He told me that himself one evening about 3 weeks after the flood, when he walked across the line and came up onto my porch for the first time without swagger. He looked worn down, like the house had aged him instead of the other way around. Lorna brought iced tea because she has better manners than either of us deserved at that point, and Caleb sat there holding the glass with both hands, staring toward the swale. "Insurance is covering some electrical," he said, "but most of the finish work is on us." I nodded. "That is rough." He let out a tired laugh. "Rough is a generous word." Then he said something I did not expect. "I was not trying to hurt you, Hank." I looked at him for a second. "I know that. I wanted it clean," he said. "I wanted it to look like something my family could be proud of." And I understood him then. Not enough to excuse it, but enough to see the human shape of it. Caleb had moved out there thinking land was another project, another asset, another thing you could design into obedience. Maybe he thought people like me kept things ugly because we lacked imagination. Maybe he thought if he spent enough, the place would finally respect him. I said, "Caleb, out here, clean is not always safe, and ugly is not always useless." He nodded slowly, like he was hearing it for real this time. Then he said, "Martin still wants to fight." I asked, "Do you?" He did not answer for a long while. The frogs were loud down by the low ground, and the swale made a soft trickling sound under the fence. Calm now, almost gentle, like it had not just rearranged both our lives. Finally, Caleb said, "I do not know what I want anymore." A week later, we walked into the county courthouse. It was an old brick building with dim hallways, wooden benches, and floors that complained under every bootstep. Judge Ruth Harlan took the bench at 9 sharp. A small woman with silver hair, sharp eyes, and no patience for theatre. Martin tried theatre anyway. He talked about good faith, incomplete disclosures, extreme weather, modern landscaping standards, and how rural drainage practices could be misunderstood by a new owner. Judge Harlan let him go for a while, then looked over her glasses and asked, "Counselor, are you suggesting the water misunderstood the landscaping as well?" That pretty much set the tone. Owen stood and laid out the facts like a man stacking fence boards, one clean piece at a time. The easement, the survey, the county map, the warning I gave Caleb before he filled it, Doris's written notice, the photos of my flooded field, the aerial images, the excavation pictures showing fresh clay packed over the original channel. By the time Doris testified, the room had gone quiet in that special way people get when excuses start running out of road. She explained how the basin drained, how the swale protected both properties, and how Caleb had been warned in person and in writing. Then Owen called me. I told the judge about my grandfather, about the fields, about the night I found the swale gone, about trying to warn Caleb again when the water started collecting in his foundation. Owen asked me, "Mr. Whitmore, did you ever tell Mr. Moss what would happen if the drainage remained blocked?" I looked across the room at Caleb. He looked back, tired and pale, but he did not look away. I said, "I told him water remembers where it belongs." Judge Harlan wrote something down. Then she called Caleb. Her questions were simple. "Did Hank warn you before the work was done?" Caleb said yes. "Did the county notify you that the swale was protected drainage?" "Yes." "Did you restore it after that notice?" "Not until after the flooding." "Why not?" Caleb swallowed, and the whole courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then he said, "I thought everyone was making it sound worse than it was." No one said anything for a moment. There it was, not ignorance, of confusion. Pride. Judge Harlan ruled from the bench. The easement was valid. Caleb had knowingly obstructed county drainage. His actions contributed directly to agricultural loss, emergency restoration, county costs, and preventable property damage. He was ordered to pay for permanent restoration, my crop damages, legal fees, county penalties, and additional engineering work to make sure the swale could never be buried again without approval. The total came to $146,000 and change. No yelling, no dramatic music, just numbers landing one after another like hail on a tin roof outside, under a grey afternoon sky. Caleb came over to me alone. For a second I thought he might say something defensive, one last little shield for his pride. Instead he looked toward the fields and said, "Hank, I'm sorry. It was quiet, real, late but real." I nodded and said, "I believe you." He gave a small broken smile and said, "House still smells like a swamp." I said, "That may be the land making sure you remember." He actually laughed at that, and for the first time since he had moved in, he sounded like a neighbor instead of a man trying to conquer the place. I still think about it whenever storms roll over Millstone. I think about how many times a person should be warned before you let consequences do the talking. I think about the difference between justice and satisfaction, because they feel similar from a distance, but up close, they are not the same thing. Caleb paid what he owed. The swale stayed open. My field recovered as best it could, and every spring now, when the rain comes hard, I walk down there and watch the water slide past the fence exactly where it belongs. So let me ask you this. If you had warned a neighbor again and again, showed him the records, brought in the county, watched him ignore all of it, and then saw the flood heading for his own front door, would you keep trying to save him? Or would you step back and let the water teach the lesson? Tell me in the comments, because I truly want to know where you draw that line between being a good neighbor and letting a stubborn man meet the consequences he invited.